Anyone with $10,000 or more in credit card debt or personal loans may qualify for help from National Debt Relief. Getting started is easy.
Conflict, but we are going to see how one of his most recent executive orders may or may not influence future aid shipments to Ukraine. All right, what's going on, everyone? So today we're going to take a look at some updates around the ongoing war in Ukraine. We're going to start with some battlefield updates using Deep State Map. I'll go ahead and pull that up here. We're going to shift over to some Trump statements about the war. Still pretty unknown the direction he's going to take in this conflict, but we are going to see how one of his most recent executive orders may or may not influence future aid shipments to Ukraine. We're going to take a look at some recent conversations about the increasing likelihood of European troops or Western troops in general arriving on the battlefield, that possibility. There's a story recently that just came out talking about Russian filtration camps, which, look, at baseline is a pretty disgusting story, but it is a part of this conflict. So we're going to get into that. And then we'll wrap up with, I guess, our favorite Russian doom poster, Igor Girkin, pro-Russian, wants Russia to win this war, and just came out earlier today venting that they've lost in every way, shape, and form. Always an interesting take from Girkin. Now, all of these resources will be linked in the description below, starting with Deep State Map here, a publicly available resource. So looking at the overall map of Ukraine to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at here, the dark red or purplish, if you will, down here in the south with Crimea, and over here in Donetsk and Luhansk. These are areas occupied by Russia in 2014. The orangish areas is territory of Ukraine occupied by Russia since 2022. The green is territory once occupied by Russia since liberated by Ukraine. Now, the area we're going to focus in on today is down here in the south, namely Velika Novoselka. This name might sound familiar. It's a small town, village, if you will, but it might sound familiar to people who have been following the war because this was the location of pretty significant offensive activity during Ukraine's push south back in the summer of 2023. So this was one of the territories that they liberated. And there was a lot of fighting in and around this direction, showing the progress of Ukraine in the south. As of today, January 23rd, 2025, it looks like Velika Novoselka is on the brink of falling to Russian forces entirely. Now, there's some speculation. One of the major concerns here is the Ukrainian forces that might still be trapped on the verge of being cut off here in Velika Novoselka. And you can see how that might play out, right? With Russian forces advancing in two directions. You can see the main road coming in and out of this town appears to now be under Russian control. So anybody wanting to flee at this point would have to do so at least over one body of water. It's getting harder and harder to actually leave this area. It's going to be an area worth keeping an eye on here. But this is generally how Russian forces have fought this war for quite a while.
Oh, the vice principal just called me and she said, I think I'm misinterpreting the message. She said it should be, she goes,
like the last major head-on assault, if you will, major one at least, was in Bakhmut. And if you recall that offensive, which to give you an idea, the orientation here is a little bit up here to the northeast. So we've got Bakhmut up here. Generally speaking, the Wagner forces here led the charge directly head on into the Ukrainian defenses. They did take the city over time at a significant cost of lives. So what we've seen change since then is more of these pincer type movements, if you will, where, and Vilka Novosilka actually shows it pretty well. I'm going to take, go back. Let's see. We'll go back to early December here. Let's go back mid-December, try to give you an idea. So here you can see, instead of charging head on, the Russian forces are kind of coming from the south and the northeast. By the end of the month, see how they're advancing, but the front hasn't really changed here. You'll see they'll slowly advance and kind of encircle that location until, you know, eventually the Ukrainian forces are forced to withdraw. And this is actually something that we've seen a lot of pushback on against the chain of command inside of Ukraine at this point. It's played out at a couple different locations. One of the more recent ones was actually over here in Volodar, which now seems like a lifetime ago. But in Volodar, something similar played out, where the Russians managed to push to the east and the west, slowly encircle that town, and then eventually Ukrainian forces had to withdraw. So the big question right now around Velka Novoselka is not if it will fall. Clearly it will, just looking at how this map is played out right now. It's how many Ukrainian forces are remaining in that pocket. There is going to be some sort of rear guard to try to slow the Russian advance so other elements can evacuate the city. And that's generally what we've seen for a long time in this conflict. There haven't been dozens or even hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers that are captured when something like this falls. But there is always the question of how worth it was it to leave that rear guard in place and not evacuate earlier, essentially, and pull back to a maybe more fortified secondary or tertiary position. Now, what's interesting right now is we're seeing a lot of focus on Velka Novoselka, understandably so. Relatively small, not all that strategically important. The strategically important area is just up here to the northeast, Pokrovsk. Now, this isn't getting nearly as much attention right now, but we are starting to see more of an encirclement take place here. Again, to go back to our map, at the beginning of the month, you can see the Russian forces, it's slow and at a very heavy cost around Pokrovsk. But if we go back, let's go to November 1st. You can see the progress that's already been made since November. And rather than attacking Pokrovsk head on, we'll kind of skip a few days at a time here. Kind of a cheat man's time lapse, if you will. You'll see how they've slowly but surely kind of expanded around the city in an aim of eventually cutting this off entirely. So now I'm moving through January up to today. So you can see the issue here where there's a couple major concerns for the Ukrainian forces now at Pokrovsk, cutting off the supply lines to the west and to the east. Now, to the east, the concern here would be shutting off any sort of cooperation, coordination. Two elements over here in Toretsk, New York, all the way up into Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut. There is still a line open through Kramatorsk, but it would essentially sever any major lines of communication to the east of Pokrovsk. The other issue here is just to the west. So this is arguably more important because if this is cut off, you can see how it affects major supply routes coming in to
So I found that website. See if y'all can see it. I'm gonna see if y'all can see it right now. I'm gonna see if you guys can see what I am seeing. Boom. Can you guys see that? Can y'all see that? I don't think y'all can see that. I don't think y'all can see that. Oh yeah, you can. Just see. Oh, put it back. Just give it a couple seconds. It's gonna come up. Boom. It's all the war shit going on right here. This is all the fighting going on. Shit looks low key fucked for Ukraine. It's a lot of fucking. I mean, they got people back here too. That'd be crazy if they really do got people back there. Look at that shit. I mean, that shit ain't gonna stop, bro. Wonder what those red ones mean up there. Let me click one of these. First tank regime. 23-7 tank regime. 25th separate guard mortar rifle. Sheesh. That's dope though. This shit is crazy though. That's dope. Ukraine is doing their thing, man. They're pushing them back. I think we could go check out what was it like yesterday or the day before. We'll just see when it starts changing. We'll just see. Does it ever change? See what happened last year. She looks the same. She looks like a standstill. Ain't nothing happening. There it is. Something happened right there. Let me see. Let me go back like at least 3 months. Another 3 months. Yeah, let me back a little bit. Flicky. It is what it is. Let me just pin that right there. Let's go back to what this guy was saying.
Reinforce and resupply a good chunk of the eastern front in Ukraine. So we are still seeing Russian advances near Pokrovsk and Velika Novoselka, kind of the two major areas to keep an eye on right now. Ukraine, of course, is still operating in the Kursk region up here. No major changes in the last few weeks, really. The last major operation Ukraine pushed in was able to.
Breaking news. President Trump signs whatever. Wild scene in Gaza during hostage release. What I want to see. Let's go to my channel. You know, let's check out this. Yeah. Let's check out something else.
Alex.
That team is low key. This team right here was not working.
You know Gary here.
Oh, yeah, right here. See the smoke because I knew they were gonna push me.
Ёб твою мать, так на мне, Гарик.
There's some German homies right there. I think I was in a German server right there. German, I think. I was thinking, man, I better get a shot.
Всем привет.
Seeing
Здорово.
being,
Гарик, поставь на мне, что вражеский этот, Гарик.
and honestly, I found this bush. Like,
Е4.
Okay,
I was in this
Yeah,
bush and I was like, oh, you know what? This is a
I'm
good
gonna go right now.
Just chilling here.
I don't see no Gary here.
Pretty sure that guy was. There's a Garrett. Two guys right there. So I was like, fuck, I gotta get up, but I have to get them sneaky. Because if I pop out, they're gonna see me and I'm like, I gotta get this move. Oh, barely good.
Ой, блядь. Обрати внимание на метку танка. Что ошибный стоит танк. По какой метке?
In one of his final acts as president, Joe Biden commuted the sentence of indigenous activist Leonard Peltier.
I make no apology. I've issued more individual pardon and commutation than any president in U.S. history.
Leonard Peltier was a leader in the American Indian Movement, an organization that worked for better health care, education, and jobs for Native and Indigenous people living on or off reservations. Peltier was convicted of aiding and abetting murder in the 1975 deaths of 2 FBI agents during a shootout on South Dakota's Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. He was given 2 consecutive life sentences. Despite being in prison for almost 50 years, he maintains that he was not guilty. For decades, communities have rallied to have his conviction overturned. Even the prosecutor who helped put Peltier behind bars wrote on his behalf asking for the sentence to be commuted. President Biden wrote in a statement, tribal nations, Nobel Peace laureates, former law enforcement officials, including the former U.S. attorney whose office oversaw Mr. Peltier's prosecution and appeal. Dozens of lawmakers and human rights organizations strongly support granting Mr. Peltier clemency, citing his advanced age, illnesses, his close ties to and leadership in the Native American community, and the substantial length of time he has already spent in prison. Peltier's conviction is not overturned by this presidential action. Commuting his sentence lessens the prison time and allows Peltier to be released. For Inside Edition Digital, I'm TC Newman.
Kristen, I think that I've learned my lesson on speaking for the president before he and I have actually talked about an issue.
So he would veto a federal abortion ban?
I think he would. He said that explicitly that he would.
Would you veto a national abortion ban if it came
Well,
to
I
your
won't
desk?
have to.
But if I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto it if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D. in all fairness.
Senator Vance, just to clarify once and for all, if Donald Trump were to be elected, if a federal abortion ban were to land on his desk, would he veto it?
Well, Kristen, as you saw the president say, we hadn't discussed it. We still haven't discussed it, by the way, because it's not realistic, Kristen. And I think that was the point that he made during the debate is he's been incredibly clear that he doesn't support a national abortion ban. He wants abortion policy to be made by the states because he thinks, look, Alabama is going to make a different decision from California, and that's okay. We're a big country.
Just to put a fine point on this, you're saying he wouldn't support it. So would he veto it?
Kristen, I think that I've learned my lesson on speaking for the president before he and I have actually talked about an issue.
So he would veto a federal abortion ban?
I think he would. He said that explicitly that he would.
Would you veto?
Good stuff. Good stuff, man. That's some good stuff right there. Trump wants gold business. Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
We just saw Donald Trump take virtual center stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. It was his first major speech to global business and political leaders since taking office just a few days ago. It really was the first time as 47th president he addressed the number one issue for most Americans, the economy, beyond the top line promises we saw on day one of his presidency, including the inauguration. Some of the key issues, of course, are lowering inflation and how he is going to deal with job issues. CNN is covering this story from all angles. Richard Quest is on the ground in Davos. Jeff Zeleny is at the White House. Daniel Dale is, of course, our fact checker. I want to start first with you, Richard. You are there. You cover these issues in and out. What was your biggest takeaway?
Well, first of all, good luck, Daniel, as you try and fact check that lot. I am absolutely exhausted having listened to all of that. It was a potpourri of great hits. But if we actually sift it down to policy announcements that we learned from today. Number one, he's calling on OPEC to lower the price of oil via the Saudis. He wants them to lower the price of oil, but at the same time, he wants the Saudis, who've already pledged to spend $500 billion, to raise that to $1 trillion. He says he's now hoping that the Crown Prince MBS will invest $1 trillion in the United States. He's going to now call upon NATO to increase the defense spending to 5%. Now, he talked about this during the election, but today, as I listened to the president, he said, I am calling on NATO to increase the defense spending to 5%, when barely, it was a hard job to get them to the old target. This is going to be very difficult. And the biggie, in my view, the biggie on the economy. He has warned European production, European companies, European countries, manufacture in the United States. And these were the president's words. It's your prerogative not to, but if you choose not to, we will tariff. In other words, the threat, the gauntlet has now been thrown down. You manufacture domestically or we'll tariff the product. And he still seems to think that that won't cost American consumers more.
Jeff, I want to play for our viewers a little bit of what the president said about what he considers his message for the audience.
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff.
This is precisely what Richard was talking about there. Now, I wanted our viewers to hear it for themselves. You, Jeff, were with Donald Trump when he went to Davos, physically went there, not virtually like today. That was 6 years ago. What's your takeaway from what you heard?
Look, there's no doubt that the message is largely similar in terms of America is open for business. But what is different, I think, is just the confidence in which he speaks and the delight he takes in rattling the cages of global leaders, from the business sector to global.
That's why this little thing's cool.
What's your credit card debt balance? If it's $10,000 or more, here are 3 easy solutions you can start implementing today. And
General MacArthur has deliberately stayed away from the Manila Conference, choosing to wait and come face to face with his conquered enemy on Japanese soil. He flies into Okinawa on August 29, 1945, in his own gleaming C-54 Skymaster Bataan. This is the crowning achievement of the 65-year-old conqueror's career. The defeated nation comes face to face with their conquerors on the USS Missouri at the surrender ceremony on September 2nd, 1945. Tokyo Bay is clogged with hundreds of powerful gleaming American fighting ships. At 8:55 a.m., the Japanese delegation reaches the Missouri. Finally, General MacArthur makes his entrance with Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz and Admiral William Halsey.
It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past. A world founded upon faith and understanding. A world dedicated to the dignity of man and the fulfillment of his most cherished wish for freedom, tolerance, and justice.
The signing of the surrender signals the official end to a savage conflict. After the Japanese, it's MacArthur's turn. Then come the representatives of 9 other Allied powers. As the Japanese are led away, the victors put on one final display of triumph. 1,500 planes, Boeing Superfortresses, and Navy fighters roar across the sky.
That's dope. That was dope. Right, anyway,
And Navy fighters, 1,500 planes, Boeing Superfortresses, and Navy fighters roar across the sky.
At US Bank, when we say we're in it with you, we mean it. Not just for the good stuff.
Ceremony marking the complete and formal surrender of Japan. In the Bay of Tokyo itself, the United States destroyer Buchanan comes alongside, bringing representatives of the Allied powers to witness the final capitulation. General of the Army Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Allied Commander for the occupation of Japan, boards the Missouri. Fleet Admiral Nimitz, Pacific Fleet Commander, and Admiral Halsey welcome MacArthur and his Chief of Staff, General Sutherland, aboard. Admiral Nimitz escorts General MacArthur to the Missouri's veranda deck, where the 20-minute ceremony is to take place. It is Sunday, September 2nd, 1945. Cameramen and reporters of many countries record this historic moment as United Nations military leaders crowd aboard the Missouri and examine souvenir cards bearing the Japanese flag, special mementos of the occasion. And now, in a Navy launch, the Japanese surrender party arrives. They are headed by aged Mamoru Shigemitsu, foreign minister of the Japanese surrender cabinet, who was wounded by a Korean patriot in Shanghai years ago and walks on an artificial leg. The Japanese delegation lines up on the opposite side of the surrender table from the Allies. A war which had entered its 8th terrible year in China, which had raged for 3 years and 9 months for America and Britain, which was the brutal, costly eastern half of the most horrible worldwide war in human history, is now within minutes of ending for good. General MacArthur speaks.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. The issues involving divergent ideals and ideologies have been determined on the battlefields of the world, and hence are not for our discussion or debate. The terms and conditions upon which surrender of the Japanese imperial forces is here to be given and accepted are contained in the instrument of surrender now before you. As Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, I announce it my firm purpose, in the tradition of the countries I represent, to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance, while taking all necessary dispositions to ensure that the terms of surrender are fully, promptly, and faithfully complied with. I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters to sign the instrument of surrender.
Yo, I know I got some Japanese viewers up in here, bro. Tap in, bro. Tap in with me. Japan, homies.
Surrender at the places indicated.
Mr. Shigemitsu comes to the surrender table. These dramatic first pictures were made by newsreel war correspondents and Army and Navy cameramen, and were specially flown back from Tokyo. The time is 9:05 a.m. The Japanese have been on board exactly 10 minutes.
10 minutes when we sign this paper. Hurry up. We should go ask.
General Yoshijiro Umetsu of the Imperial General Staff signs for the Japanese Army.
Hurry up.
Surrender documents by which Japan agrees to lay down arms completely and to obey all Allied orders issued by General MacArthur were printed by the Army on rare parchment found in a basement in ravaged Manila. General MacArthur signs as Supreme Allied Commander. The first pen used is presented to General Wainwright of Corregidor. The second pen to British General Percival, Commander at the surrender of Singapore. MacArthur uses 6 pens in all, affixing what will be the most important signature in Japan to the document that ends permanently that nation's regime of terror and aggression. For the forces of the United States itself, Admiral Chester Nimitz signs. Behind Nimitz are the Third Fleet's Admiral Halsey and Admiral Sherman, famed amphibious commander. General Su Young Chang, Chief of Military Operations for the Chinese National Council, signs for China. Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, commander of the British Pacific Fleet for the United Kingdom. Lieutenant General Kumsa Nikolaevich Derevyanko for Soviet Russia. General Sir Thomas Blamey for Australia. Colonel Lawrence Moore Cosgrave for Canada. General Jacques Leclerc, hero of Africa and Paris, for France. Admiral C.E.L. Helfrich for the Netherlands. Air Vice Marshal L.M. Issett for New Zealand. Concluding the brief history-making ceremony, General MacArthur expresses a wish.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed.
Swarms of United States aircraft fly in formation overhead as the ceremony ends. The final United Nations victory has been won. The war is over. Peace is here.
That shit is dope, bro. I like shit like that. That shit's hella dope. This guy right here, I've been fucking with this guy right here.
Mom, Dad?
We have something to tell you.
Yeah, but twin brother we never told you about.
Oh, sorry.
Left him in America.
I always.
This region, the Pacific, recently it's heating up. And now is probably a good time to rewind and remember what this region looked like back when there was a war happening out here on these islands, a war between great powers. Let's start right here at the end of the 1800s when Japan is expanding fast, conquering territory and taking the resources, becoming a powerful empire. By 1940, their empire looks like this. It includes hundreds of remote islands out here in the Pacific, and Japan uses these colonies to extract resources that fed this growing conquest. But they don't have everything they need yet. They still rely on the US for the most vital of resources, oil and metal. Now, the US doesn't necessarily like how aggressive Japan is being in their region, but they tolerate it. That is, until Japan allies itself with Nazi Germany, and then continues its expansion into a French colony and threatens to completely cut off the US from its ally China. So the US, along with Britain and the Netherlands, cut Japan off of oil, gas, iron, and steel. These are vital resources, so this is a major blow to Japan. They calculate that they only have 2 more years before they run out of this vital energy. They must act quickly. So they start looking further south, to land that is known to have a lot of oil. The problem for Japan is that this is all controlled by European empires. Japan makes a plan to kick out all of these Europeans and establish their own access to oil and metal so they aren't reliant on outsiders. And they sell this ambitious plan to their people by saying that they actually want to liberate Asia from European domination. So, in December 1941, they initiate this plan, sending ships and planes to drop bombs all over the region that they want to conquer. And to stop the Americans from coming to the Europeans' rescue, Japan has already sent a large chunk of its navy to surprise the Americans by bombing their navy in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It was their first step for kicking off this larger offensive. The attacks on Pearl Harbor and all over Asia were a huge, bold, and risky move for Japan. No one thought they would do it. It came as a massive surprise, and as a result, it was incredibly successful for Japan's goals. The US and its allies are now at war, but beating back Japan will not be easy. Japan has a powerful navy, and not only is America's Pacific Fleet severely damaged because of the attack on Pearl Harbor, but around this same time, Hitler has taken the moment to declare war on the US, dragging them into the European theater of World War II. Over the next 7 months, Japan takes even more territory.
Powerful and resourceful gangsters have banded together to make war upon the whole human race. Their challenge has now been flung at the United States of America. Together with other free peoples, we are now fighting to maintain our right to live among our world neighbors in freedom, in common decency, without fear of assault. We are now in this war.
The US has to surrender the Philippines, its foothold in the Pacific, and Japan forces capture and kill tens of thousands of American and Filipino troops in just one of what would become many horrific war crimes they commit during this war. By the middle of 1942, Japan has achieved its goals of kicking out European empires and securing for itself a massive empire full of resources. They're now self-sufficient, and they're growing. And they're not done. They're drunk on all of this success. And some military leaders want to keep pushing east, all the way to here, which would cut the US off from its big ally, Australia. So they set their sights on this American base located on a small atoll called Midway. If they could take Midway, the US would be so weak, Japan calculates, that they would be forced to settle this conflict, leaving Japan with all of this newly conquered territory. Alas, that's not what happened. In May of 1942, Japan sends a massive fleet of hundreds of planes, accompanied by battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and submarines, as well as 4 of their precious aircraft carriers. Now, remember, this is World War II, and you can't really fight a war out here in the ocean without aircraft carriers, which enabled Japan's planes to land and refuel while fighting deep out in this ocean. Aircraft carriers are vital. So Japan is preparing to conquer Midway. But what they don't know is that American codebreakers in Hawaii have cracked Japan's encrypted communication and are aware of their battle plans days before the attack. This makes all the difference, and in a 4-day battle, the US defeats Japan's navy at Midway, destroying all 4 of their precious aircraft carriers in the process.
Odds looked impossible, but when it was all over, the Japanese had suffered their greatest naval defeat in history.
It's a huge blow to Japan's momentum, and from here, the US and its allies start to turn the tide on this war in the Pacific. Hey, I know we're talking about World War II, but I just want to pause really quick for a message from our sponsors. We can't make journalism and history stories like this with is just as important. I've been able to talk through the way. You sign up and they do a phone judging you, looked for a therapist channel. It also gets you an has mine. Thank you, BetterHelp, for sponsoring today's video. Let's dive back into this map of World War II. So here's a problem for both sides. Distance. It's sort of hard to fathom the distances out here. Like, you could fit the mainland United States in just one small part of the Japanese Empire. And remember that the US military has to travel thousands of kilometers just to get here. Distance is also a problem for Japan, who, yes, just conquered all of this territory, but that means that it now has to ship resources back to the mainland. It has to get men, doctors, food, and supplies out to all of this land thousands of kilometers away, creating brand new supply routes. We found this old Japanese map drawn up during the war that shows all of these colonies shaded with a red marker and showing this dizzying web of supply lines needed to keep the war going. This was a logistical nightmare for Japan.
What's the coolest job in the world? Mine, because it's the one I really wanted, and I trained for it at Northwest.
But it was also a key vulnerability that the US would exploit in this conflict. So the US begins getting into the Japanese Empire. It's off to a slow start, but eventually they settle onto a strategy of targeting certain islands, not the ones that were the most fortified, but the ones that would get them one step closer to the Japanese mainland, but also give them proximity to these supply lines. the supply lines that keep Japan's war machine running. The US starts conquering these lesser fortified islands and using them to target the ships that carry food and weapons and supplies throughout the Japanese Empire. I found this data set that shows every merchant vessel that the US and its allies sunk during these years. It's a lot. American submarines alone would go on to sink 5 million tons of Japanese shipping and naval vessels. This strategy of targeting the supply lines was a game changer for the US, allowing them to weaken the Japanese Empire by targeting its cargo, like they did down here in this key Japanese military stronghold in the south of the empire. The US and its allies first conquered nearby islands, and then used these islands as a jumping-off point to target the supply lines. But instead of mounting an attack on this stronghold, the US focused on the supply ships that were bringing food, ammunition, reinforcements, and medical supplies to this stronghold. This left tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers stranded to die of starvation and disease. The US was able to take out a key Japanese base without having to fight a battle. The island hopping strategy was really working. And if you look closely at this map, you'll see that it allowed the US to bypass these heavily fortified Japanese islands, focusing more on cutting them off than trying to conquer them, while also getting the US closer and closer to the mainland. As 1945 rolls around, the US continues to beat Japan back. The two US forces converge to retake the Philippines. All these newly captured islands allow the US to deploy their new high-tech plane, the B-29 bomber. This thing could fly super high and deep into the Japanese mainland and drop 20,000 pounds worth of bombs. Japan is clearly losing by now, so they start to resort to more brutal tactics, like having their pilots fly their planes into US ships in suicide attacks, a deadly tactic that not only led to immense damage to the US Navy, but also had a psychological element. A realization that the enemy was willing to go to great lengths to fight back. But even so, Japan's empire continued to shrink, almost as quickly as it had expanded. But the closer the US gets to the mainland, the more brutal the fighting is becoming. For a variety of reasons, there's really only one path to invade the mainland. You have to hop along the southern island chain and invade from the south. So the US sets their sights on perhaps the most important island in the Pacific, Okinawa. Japan knows that the US is coming for Okinawa, so they recruit around 40,000 local men, giving some of them only spears to defend themselves. Together with the army, they dig tunnels and caves and trenches and bunkers. The army gives out hand grenades to civilians, telling them to commit suicide instead of surrender, warning them that the Americans will be brutal and violent to anyone they capture. Japan wants this battle to convince the Americans that invading the mainland is a bad idea. It's their last-ditch effort to avoid defeat. The US hits the beach at Okinawa, starting one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war. 82 days of violence that leaves a third of the population dead, a total of around 100,000 Japanese in addition to 12,000 American soldiers.
Welcome to America. What do you think?
The Brutalist is now the Golden Globe winner for Best Picture.
It's ambitious.
A monumental symphony of the immigrant experience. It's an emotional tour de force.
They do not want us here.
Who do you mean?
There are people here.
And the movie of the year.
It is the destination, not the journey.
The Brutalist.
Today, I'm going to show you how sales reps can use Einstein AI to quickly find the best leads and then generate.
And the US wins. They now control the most valuable island of them all, the island that will enable them to invade the mainland. But they're also left with a horrifying clarity of how serious Japan is about not surrendering, about fighting until the very end. Invading the mainland will be costly. Meanwhile, in Europe, Hitler and his allies have been defeated. The winners get together and issue a statement to Japan: unconditional surrender or face prompt and utter destruction. Now that Hitler is defeated, the Soviet Union is also preparing to join the US to deal the final blow to Japan. But Japan doesn't reply to the demand for surrender. and the Allies see this as a rejection. Back in the US, in the deserts of the Southwest, the US has just successfully tested an atomic bomb. So now they have a decision to make. They either continue their momentum and invade the mainland of Japan and face not only Japanese soldiers, but civilian militias of potentially tens of millions of citizens ready to fight. And it would also involve the Soviet Union participating, which means if they won the war with the Soviets' help, they would have to split control and influence over Japan's empire after the war. Or the second option was to use their new powerful bomb to swiftly end the war with no more loss of American lives and much less Soviet influence in post-war Japan. They could do it on their own while also sending a message to the Soviets that they were the most powerful. On August 6, 1945, they chose the second plan. They dropped this unfathomably powerful bomb on the city of Hiroshima, releasing a hellfire the world had never seen and killing 140,000 people, almost all of them civilians, forever altering the course of history. 2 days later, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and began rapidly taking their territory. When Japan still doesn't surrender, the US drops another bomb, this one on the city of Nagasaki. The Soviets continue to rapidly take territory, and it's more clear than ever that it is over for Japan. While some factions of the Japanese army still don't want to surrender, the emperor goes around them and tells the nation that it's over. Japan is unconditionally surrendering. The Americans moved in, took away Japan's powerful military, prosecuted the war criminals, and sent tens of thousands of troops to the vital island of Okinawa, where the US stayed as the occupying power until the 1970s, and where they still have tens of thousands of troops that serve American interests in Asia, while also being Japan's main source of security. The memory of this war is still in the minds of the people here, especially for those in the cities that were bombed and the southern islands that were invaded. And as this region becomes tense again, Japan is now expanding its military once again, mostly down here on these vital islands. I traveled here to see what that looks like and to talk to the people about what this feels like, what they're worried about. And I'll be sharing that story in an upcoming video.
Let's pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve.
Good video, bro. I think it's great videos.